Chief Analyst Avrax was contemplating the flicker of his own crystalline forearms, watching the subtle shift from pale green to a faint lavender. For most members of a species, a race of bipedal crystals that changed color with every emotional fluctuation, such discoloration indicated deep stress. In Avrax's case, it meant something closer to exasperated disbelief. He stood in his personal alcove within the Galactic Threat Oversight Bureau, the massive interstellar headquarters that occupied an entire orbit around the star known as Kestra 9. Avrax prided himself on his ability to maintain a steady glow of calm blue. But ever since the new assignment had come in, he had been unable to regain that color. He reread the memo from the Galactic Council with the same growing sense of unease he'd experienced the first dozen times. Classification of species 12,758, human, Terran, must be completed before the upcoming summit. Failure to meet this deadline will result in a reduction of GTOB funding for the next 4 cycles. The message was terse, but the threat was very real. Funding cuts could mean partial shutdown of entire departments. There were already rumors of key positions in the Bureau being eliminated if they didn't submit a final report in time. And so all eyes were on Avrax, the most detail-oriented analyst in the GTOB. An almost mythic figure rumored to have perfected the cross-referencing tables for over 1,000 species. Yet now, he was facing the greatest challenge of his career. "Chief, you seem a tad pink," said a voice at the door. It belonged to Sharim, Avrax's assistant. Sharim's species resembled something between a cephalopod and a walking sponge, with 4 main tentacles for locomotion and 2 smaller ones for fine manipulation. Those smaller tentacles were currently clutching a datapad stacked with half a dozen holographic attachments. Sharim's bulbous torso pulsed softly with a curious fluorescence. "Is that stress or confusion?" Avrax coughed, or made the approximate crystalline resonance that passed for a cough. "Stress, confusion, mild existential dread. Take your pick. The Council wants a final classification of humans. That means we have to slot them into one of the existing categories, or else propose a new one." Sharim set down the datapad, scanning it rapidly with a cluster of small black eyes. "But we've tried to classify humans multiple times. The GTOB archives show at least 9 attempts. Each time, the data is contradictory. Biologically, they're unimpressive. No claws, no significant exoskeleton, no enhanced telepathy. They rely on technology, but they aren't the only ones doing that in the galaxy. Yet every attempt to put them into a neat little folder fails." Avrax's forearms darkened to a faint violet. "The Council memo says they're giving us this one last chance before they finalize the budget." He glanced across the alcove, where rows of stacked crystal rods served as backups of all the classification data. Some species are easy to handle. You scan them, note their primary survival adaptations, measure their aggression potential, and file them accordingly. Humans, though, they barely seem threatening at first glance, but the old records indicate they can outmaneuver star fleets through something called improvisation. They negotiate peace treaties by stumbling into them, and apparently, they can accidentally activate advanced technology without the faintest idea how it works. Sharim's lower tentacles rippled in a gesture of sympathy. "I heard they once made a Validarian cruiser believe it was facing an entire Terran armada, simply by uploading random fractal illusions to the Validarian targeting system. That cruiser surrendered and offered terms before it realized it had been tricked by what humans call a neat hacking hack." Avrax forced himself to return to a paler shade of lavender, a color that suggested at least partial composure. "Yes, that incident is in the database. The official note is that humans possess a disturbing capacity for creative deception. That single line has haunted me ever since I read it. Because how do we quantify creative deception in the standard threat metrics?" Sharim flicked through the datapad. "It says here we have less than 10 standard cycles before the Interstellar Congruence Summit. That's where the human delegation will be. We can observe them firsthand." Avrax sighed, or approximated a sigh in the harmonic language of crystals. "That might be the only way. We'll gather direct data, watch how they interact, and see if we can find a consistent pattern to their behavior. Because if we don't, the council will be after our budget. Sharam nodded. We can prepare a full battery of scans, interviews, infiltration techniques, whatever it takes. Indeed, Avrax said. We'll start with the archive data, gather historical precedents, then observe them in person. One way or another, we'll figure out how to classify a species. That, on paper, is so contradictory that even our comprehensive 8 million entry taxonomy can't hold them. In the days that followed, Avrax and Sharam buried themselves in the Taub's extensive records. Much of the data was superficial, general physiology, cultural footnotes, snippets of recorded Terran history. Avrax tried to remain objective, but the more they learned, the more perplexing humans became. From a purely biological standpoint, they were not built for extreme combat. No thick hides, no venom, no super senses. They had to rely on mechanical or biochemical augmentations to compete with even moderate predators on their home planet. Yet they had domesticated that planet's environment in shockingly short time. Then they developed technology for flight, communication, and eventually star travel in what seemed like a cosmic blink of an eye. Sharam found a subsection detailing the first official contact with humanity, an event that had apparently been well documented by half a dozen species. The occupant in the seat next to Sharam gave curious looks whenever Sharam's 4 main tentacles jiggled with fascination. "Listen to this," Sharam said to Avrax, who had paused in the corridor to reread a reference code. There's an account of a Terran diplomat who walked into a tri-species conference among the Dravik, the Othelians, and the Zelt. The Dravik are known for their aggression, the Othelians for their unwavering devotion to protocol, and the Zelt for their stoic disregard for emotional persuasion. Yet this one human convinced all three that they'd be more profitable if they stopped trying to sabotage each other and instead formed a joint mining venture. And it worked. Avrax's arms flashed deeper violet. How? By brandishing a superweapon? No, Sharam replied, scanning the text. According to the file, it was mostly done through flattery, jokes, and a universal translator that kept glitching, forcing the human to pantomime certain words. By the end, the Dravik were laughing, something they rarely do. The Othelians had thrown protocol out the window, and the Zelt offered the first handshake in their recorded history, all because of some comedic infusion that the Terran turned to advantage. Ridiculous, Avrax muttered. That isn't how negotiations are supposed to work. We have entire guidelines for cross-species diplomacy that revolve around formal introductions, carefully staged gift exchanges, coded body language disclaimers. Are you telling me humans ignore all of that and still succeed? Sharam's tentacles did a slow wave that indicated incredulous amusement. That's what the record says. And we're only on page 30 of the historical data. There's another note about an unsanctioned encounter near the star Grefter 5, where a small Terran merchant vessel somehow tricked a blockade run by the Cartelian pirates. They did it by masquerading as a traveling circus. They used illusions, bright lights, comedic costumes, and somehow befriended half the pirates before the pirates realized no valuables were on board. Avrax set aside the reference code he'd been studying. His forearms settled to a worried pale green. We need a new approach. Let's compile these incidents into a single timeline and see if there's any consistent pattern, or at least see if they follow any known unpredictability metric. Maybe they show a stable cycle of chaos. Over the next few days, the pair worked tirelessly. The more they compiled, the more apparent it became that humans defied all the usual categories. If they were threatened, they could become cunning and ruthless. If they were welcomed, they could be warm and surprisingly loyal. Their technology varied wildly, from antiquated duct tape solutions to cutting-edge research that rivaled some of the older species' achievements. One recorded analyst's note said, "They're equally likely to fix a broken reactor by engineering a microfusion cell or by smacking it with a metal tool in hopes it resets." Disturbingly, both methods seemed to work half the time. The Council's warnings loomed over them all. Failure to classify means no more funding. The message repeated in Avrax's mind like a dull cosmic drumbeat. The next stage was clear. They had to go to the Interstellar Congruence Summit, where over 100 species would gather under the ornate architecture of the Testran Spire. There, they would meet humans face to face. Perhaps direct observation of these bizarre creatures would yield some clarity, or at least enough evidence to craft a new subcategory. When the day finally arrived, Avrax's crystalline forearms had achieved a steady swirl of pink and lavender that signaled anxiety, excitement, and curiosity all at once. Sharim teased him about it as they boarded the Tob's official shuttle. From orbit, the Testran Spire was a shimmering needle of swirling alloys and crystal glass that rose from the surface of the planet Altaris. In the mid-morning light, it looked like a spear of rainbow. Around it, smaller buildings sprawled, each devoted to the endless administrative tasks that kept the summit functioning. Avrax and Sharim were ushered into the main concourse by a pair of towering Kolkoth guardians. The concourse itself was an architectural marvel. Hundreds of archways carved from luminescent stone, high ceilings displaying constellations, and clusters of delegates from across the galaxy mingling in an environment that resembled a chaotic bazaar more than a formal event. Everyone was here. Reptilian Zeth advisors, ephemeral wisps that hovered and glowed, the multi-limbed Vres tribal leaders, and the insectoid tick who scuttled across the polished floor. Focus on the humans, Avrax whispered as they approached a grand central fountain shaped like a swirling spiral galaxy. Keep your eyes on anything out of the ordinary. Sharim raised a tentacle and pointed across the crowd. Is that them? The group near the left alcove, wearing matching garments and no visible weapons. Avrax followed Sharim's gaze and saw about 5 or 6 bipedal figures with hair in various shades of brown, black, or blonde. They were average height, wore polite smiles, and seemed to exude an almost unsettling calm despite being surrounded by an assembly of species far more intimidating in stature. A tall female among them was speaking to a Dravic warrior who dwarfed her in size and boasted an array of bone spurs along its arms. Yet the Dravic was laughing, or the Dravic's approximation of laughter, a terrifying rumble that made other delegates step aside in alarm. Avrax blinked his crystalline membranes. A Dravic actually laughing? One of them is pointing at a small device that glows with different colors, Sharim muttered. Is it a translator or a novelty entertainment system? They drifted closer, trying to look casual. The Dravic boomed. The only reason no one dares approach us is that we are unstoppable in combat. Yet here you are, small Terran, offering me a flashing light that syncs to music. The Dravic's voice was full of genuine bafflement. The human holding the device shrugged. It's just an app we made for fun, called Disco Lights. It might be silly, but we find it's a good icebreaker. See, if we time it to the ambient music in the hall, it changes patterns, sort of a universal language of color. Several other delegates, drawn by curiosity, formed a semicircle around them. The Dravic stared at the swirling lights. Moments later, the Dravic reared back its head and let out another rumbling laugh that shook the floor. Such pointless technology, yet oddly delightful. Huh. Avrax exchanged a glance with Sharim. Put that in the notes, Avrax whispered, his arms shifting to chartreuse. Humans use recreational devices for diplomatic negotiation. Potential comedic infiltration tactic. Before Sharim could finish making a note, they heard a startled shout from the far side of the concourse. They hurried over to see a commotion near a decorative table laden with exquisite alien delicacies. A second Dravic, this one wearing ceremonial armor, was glaring down at a human who was in the process of chewing something. The Dravic's eyes flared with indignation. You consumed the right offering of the blood oath? That was reserved for the official Dravic coronation ceremony. The human had a half-eaten morsel in hand and looked mortified. I'm so sorry, he managed. I thought it was an hors d'oeuvre. It was on the table. That was no mere hors d'oeuvre, the Dravic snarled. Nearby delegates stepped back, anticipating a violent reaction. Avrax's arms glowed bright red. He feared that they were about to witness a murder. But the Dravic abruptly burst out laughing, the same terrifying rumble as before. You have spirit, Terran, to sample the most sacred dish without hesitation. Truly, You demonstrate the fearlessness our culture values. The human blinked in confusion, still holding the half-eaten morsel. I do. Indeed, the Dravik boomed. Henceforth, you are an honorary battle sibling to my clan. We Dravik respect those who embrace risk. He clapped the human on the back so hard that the man staggered. Yet the Dravik's tone was warm, almost affectionate. Come, let's share more of this sacred food. You do not mind if we skip the rest of the ceremony, do you? The Terran's fellow delegates looked equally stunned. One of them stammered, "This is fantastic news, right? I think we just formed an alliance." Avrax and Sharim stood at a distance, reeling. It was the exact opposite outcome of what protocol would predict. By all standard guidelines, eating a species' sacred offering uninvited should have triggered an offense punishable by severe diplomatic sanctions, or at least a formal apology requiring an elaborate exchange of gifts. Instead, the Dravik now considered the human some kind of blood brother. Avrax tapped a finger against his forearm, the color shifting a perplexed magenta. Does any of this make sense to you? Sharim's tentacles flailed in a gesture meaning absolutely not. But we have to keep documenting it. This might be how humans convert potential enemies into allies, by accidentally stumbling into their customs. The pair continued to shadow the human delegation throughout the day, collecting more baffling data. They saw a gray-bearded Terran enthralling a group of insectoid tick children by performing sleight-of-hand illusions. The tick had multifaceted eyes capable of tracking microscopic motion, yet they seemed genuinely astonished every time the human made a small coin vanish. Another human managed to calm a Vresh tribal leader by spontaneously offering a gift of sweet-smelling Terran tea leaves. The Vresh, normally suspicious, accepted the tea as if it were a precious commodity. Within minutes, they were discussing trade possibilities for rare metals. Everywhere Avrax looked, humans were forging connections that no rational metric would have predicted. Some of it was comedic, bright lights, apps, silly gestures, or jokes that lost half their meaning in the universal translator. Yet worked. The delegates from formidable species, some with centuries of protocol behind them, found themselves charmed or at least intrigued by these unarmed, outwardly harmless bipeds. As the hours passed, Avrax began feeling an itch of frustration in his crystalline matrix. Humans seemed to turn every potential fiasco into a mild success, every misunderstanding into a surprising advantage. They were, in short, the living embodiment of chaos wrapped in a diplomatic veneer. Avrax was certain that if left to their own devices, the Terrans would either solve half the galaxy's conflicts or inadvertently start new ones. But the real turning point came later that evening, when the delegates gathered in the grand auditorium for a cultural exchange ceremony. The auditorium's vaulted ceiling displayed an illusory galaxy above them, shifting stars and nebulas. At the center of the stage was an ancient artifact believed to be from the precursors, that vanished civilization rumored to have existed eons before the modern species evolved. No one had ever managed to activate the artifact or even discover its true purpose. It was an oblong device about the size of a large trunk, made from a silver-like metal and inscribed with cryptic symbols. The artifact was a ceremonial centerpiece. The council had placed it there more as a token of cosmic history than as anything functional. Sharim was busy scanning it from a distance, hoping to glean some final puzzle piece to distract from the human anomaly. Avrax stood to the side, arms folded, trying to remain calm amid the swirling crowd. Then, one of the human delegates, a younger individual with an eager expression, approached the artifact. Perhaps the human was just curious. Perhaps they thought the inscription was some kind of puzzle. No one was entirely sure, because it all happened too quickly. The Terran ran a hand along the artifact, remarking in a perfectly audible voice, "Wow, that's a cool piece of tech. I wonder if it does anything." Then the Terran gave it a gentle slap, as though tapping an unresponsive console. If Avrax had possessed a heart in the mammalian sense, it would have stopped. To everyone's astonishment, the artifact flickered to life. A series of lights in the metal began pulsing, forming lines of glowing script that no translator recognized. Shocked gasps filled the air. Several delegates scrambled back. Security officers rushed forward, unsure whether to tackle the human or shield them. The Terran stepped back hastily, hands raised. "I didn't mean to. I was just sorry." Alarms blared, and the swirling illusions on the ceiling began to distort. The artifact rose a few centimeters off its pedestal, humming as the lights on its surface shifted through the entire visible spectrum. Panic threatened to erupt. Avrax felt his arms blazing bright orange with a flicker of red. Sharam's tentacles wrapped around a support column. A host of armed guards were about to intervene when, just as suddenly, the Terran stepped forward again and smacked the artifact once more on its side. A hush fell. The artifact's humming subsided. Instead, a holographic display projected from its top, revealing an elaborate three-dimensional star map. Some of the symbols seemed to indicate coordinates. Others showed lines connecting different star systems. The entire auditorium went still as delegates stared in awe. This was presumably a precursor navigation chart, or some record of how they traveled the galaxy millennia ago. No one had ever seen it active. Now, it glowed in all its ancient brilliance, courtesy of one clueless Terran's apparently random fiddling. Avrax's mind whirled with 1,000 calculations. He could practically hear the meltdown that would ensue at GTOB if a centuries-old puzzle had just been solved by an impulsive human approach known as percussive maintenance. Part of him wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Part of him wanted to faint from a knowledge that any attempt to classify this species using standard methods now seemed utterly hopeless. In a stunned silence, the Terran who had smacked the artifact cleared their throat. "I'm really sorry if I messed anything up. It just started glowing after I touched it, and I thought maybe hitting it again would fix it. Guess that turned it on for good." A wave of confusion, relief, and renewed excitement rippled through the auditorium. Several species that studied the precursors advanced on the stage, scanning the artifact, taking frantic notes. Meanwhile, the human delegation exchanged anxious glances. One of them approached an official. "We don't want anyone to think we meant any harm. This is your artifact, after all. We just got curious." The official, who seemed to be some sort of archivist from the planet Tesseran, bowed stiffly. "Your direct approach has accomplished what centuries of careful research could not. Many of us spent decades examining that device. None dared treat it so casually." Perhaps that was the key. Avrax realized that he was gripping Sharam's shoulder, tentacle, rather, with a trembling hand. He let go and tried to regain composure, but the swirling red and orange in his arms told everyone around him just how rattled he was. The ceremony ended with a mixture of frantic scientific discussion and a sense of awe. No immediate doom had befallen them, apparently. Instead, they had a brand new cosmic puzzle to unravel. And the entire fiasco was courtesy of the Terrans. Within an hour, that story spread through the entire summit. "Humans can activate precursor artifacts by accident," delegates whispered. "They turned it on by smacking it like an old console." The rumor grew more grandiose with each retelling. By the time Avrax and Sharam made it back to their GTOB observation suite, Avrax's datapad was overflowing with urgent inquiries, frantic messages, and a direct summons from his superiors to submit a preliminary classification by the next morning. Avrax collapsed into a crystalline chair, letting his arms rest in a dull green glow. Sharam tapped around on the console, trying to organize the data they'd gathered. "So how exactly do we put this into a neat little category?" Sharam asked. "We have recorded evidence that humans are physically underwhelming but culturally dominant, lacking natural weapons, yet producing near-infinite improvised solutions. They are simultaneously naive and cunning. They can be dangerously deceptive, yet also disarmingly sincere. They might be the greatest threat or the greatest ally a species could have." Avrax emitted a low harmonic hum. "We can't force them into an existing classification. None fits. Our standard categories revolve around whether a species is technologically advanced, biologically formidable, mentally telepathic, or specialized in chemical warfare. Humans don't excel at any single domain, but they have enough haphazard skill in each to be incredibly effective in ways that defy the typical threat matrix. Sharam scanned through a half-finished outline. We could propose a brand new classification, something that captures the paradoxical nature of humans, like calling them paradoxical threat entities. That would require us to ask the Council to accept an entirely new threat class, though. Think of the red tape. Avrax flickered from pink to purple. Yes, but might be the only option. If we don't do it, we'll submit a worthless report, the Council will reject it, and our funding will vanish. If we do propose a new category, we at least buy ourselves time, even though it will be an administrative nightmare. He paused, swirling through anxious magenta. And maybe we should do it, because at this point, the humans clearly belong in a class of their own. They spent the remainder of the night hammering out the details, referencing every contradictory line of data to support the idea that humans were a threat, not in the conventional sense, but because they warped conventional sense. Time and again, the humans caused outcomes no standard predictive algorithm could anticipate. A single Terran might transform a solemn ceremony into a comedic spectacle, or might accidentally solve an ancient technological enigma. Their unpredictability itself was the threat. By dawn, they had cobbled together a preliminary report. It was 40 pages long, complete with graphs, charts, and examples from Terran encounters across known space. Avrax's arms settled into a fatigued shade of gray as he read the final summary. Species 12,758, human, Terran recommended classification, paradoxical threat entity. Unarmed civilian potential is equivalent to a deadly predator in terms of disruptive capacity. Approach with caution. Diplomatic exchange advised, but extremely difficult to regulate. Probability of unexpected outcomes, extremely high. Sharim let out a weary gurgle. We're going to be laughed at by the entire Bureau. And I'm also worried that humans might take offense if they discover we're labeling them as a threat entity. Avrax rubbed at a small chip in his arm that had cracked from stress. The Council can present it diplomatically. We just provide the data and let them spin it however they want. We've done our job. At least, I hope we have. They arrived at the Council's designated meeting chamber that morning, hoping the official review would be brief. Instead, they found the place in an uproar. Dozens of delegates had gathered outside, bombarding each other with questions about the newly activated precursor artifact. Word had gotten out that the Terrans planned to further investigate the star map it projected. Some species were protesting, claiming the Terrans had no rightful claim to the artifact's secrets. Others were clamoring for a joint expedition. Amid this chaos, a GTOB official ushered Avrax and Sharim into a private conference room. Waiting there in an elevated seat was the director of GTOB, a tall, four-limbed being who gave no visible sign of gender or species under the layers of official regalia. Next to the director stood two assistants, each busily tapping at consoles. The director waved them forward. I assume your classification is ready. Avrax bowed, arms flickering between lavender and green. Yes, director. We propose a new category, paradoxical threat entity. We have documented evidence that humans, while lacking traditional offensive capabilities, consistently generate outcomes that defy predictive modeling. We attribute this to their capacity for creative problem-solving, spontaneous behavior, and apparently endless adaptability. There was a moment of silence. The director scrolled through their datapad, scanning the summary. This is highly unorthodox, Chief Analyst Avrax. We haven't created a new threat category in centuries. The Council of Metrics might be alarmed. Sharim interjected softly. Nonetheless, we see no other solution. Humans do not fit any existing classification. Attempts to shoehorn them into existing ones would produce a flawed assessment. The director's elongated face betrayed no emotion. Very well. I will present this to the Council. In the meantime, you two are directly responsible for managing the human question at the summit. Any incidents, positive or negative, will reflect on GTOB. The last thing we need is a scandal related to new species classification. They left the room feeling both relieved and more anxious than before. Avrax's arms flickered as he recalled the promise to keep the humans in check, or at least document their chaos. For the rest of the summit, Avrax and Sharim divided their time between discreetly monitoring the humans' every move and fielding questions from curious delegates. The star map from the artifact was still being analyzed in the background, adding another layer of excitement and tension. The council scheduled an emergency session to discuss the artifact, and the humans became the main point of interest. During this time, Sharim managed to interview a few of the Terrans under the guise of casual conversation. He asked them about their culture, their approach to new technologies, even their love of risk-taking. What emerged was a picture of a species that embraced trial and error, valued curiosity, and had a long history of innovation born from necessity. They carried no standard approach to anything. Each human had a personal style, a personal set of beliefs. They disagreed among themselves constantly, yet still found enough common ground to form entire planetary governments. Avrax, for his part, recorded multiple instances of humans forging rapid alliances based on humor, shared experiences, or a single moment of accidental empathy. He watched them consume beverages that apparently contained mild toxins which gave them energy, something called coffee. He saw them partake of other substances called alcohol that seemed to lower their inhibitions and sometimes led to questionable decisions, yet also created surprising camaraderie. On the final day of the summit, the council convened in the Grand Assembly Hall. Delegates from all represented species took their seats in a circular arena, the ceiling displaying a rotating view of the Tessran spire from above. In the center stood the council dais, where the directors of various bureaucracies would deliver their final statements and introduce new legislation, or, in this case, new classifications. Avrax and Sharim were seated in a GTOB box overlooking the dais, their nerves on edge. One by one, the directors presented items on the docket: a new trade agreement, a protocol revision for conflict resolution, a minor classification update for a species that had developed a new form of electromagnetic defense. Finally, the director of GTOB stood, datapad in hand. The entire hall went silent. Members of the Galactic Council, the director announced, voice echoing through the hall. We bring forth a proposal from the Galactic Threat Oversight Bureau regarding species 12,758, known commonly as humans. After extensive research, analysis, and direct observation, the GTOB recommends the creation of a new classification category to accommodate their unique traits. We label them paradoxical threat entities. A ripple of murmurs surged through the assembly. Some delegates leaned forward, eyes wide. Others tapped at their own devices, scanning the summary. Several turned to their neighbors in confusion or intrigue. The director continued. According to the TOBS report, humans do not fall under standard categories due to their unpredictable adaptive strategies, capacity for creative solutions, and an apparent knack for leveraging their own limitations as advantages. They have repeatedly demonstrated the ability to diffuse or escalate situations in ways no other species can. Their unarmed civilians can, under the right circumstances, outperform trained operatives of other races simply by improvisation or deception. Hence the phrase, unarmed civilian and deadly predator are the same classification. The murmuring grew louder. Avrax's arms glowed a faint pink as he watched the reaction. Then, unexpectedly, a Dravik delegate rose. We can confirm this, the Dravik rumbled. Within the last 2 days, we have accepted a human into our clan for devouring our sacred right offering with no fear. He was unarmed and ignorant of our customs, yet we found his boldness admirable. Clearly, they are paradoxical in nature. A representative from the Tick scuttled forward. We also confirm. A human performed illusions that fooled even our multifaceted eyes. We cannot label them in the usual sense. They are indeed paradoxical. Various other delegates spoke, some praising humans as wonderful negotiators, others voicing caution that humans might disrupt carefully balanced political orders with their unpredictable approaches. The debate continued for the better part of an hour, culminating in a general consensus that the old categories were insufficient. The Council had never seen such a unanimous acceptance of a brand-new threat classification, yet that was exactly what was happening. In the midst of this, the human delegation watched with polite expressions, apparently untroubled by the word threat being associated with them. When the Council asked if they had any objections, Ambassador Elaine, the tall woman Avrax had seen earlier, stepped forward. "We're grateful for the recognition," she said, "though we're not sure whether to be flattered or concerned by the description. In the spirit of cooperation, we invite the GTOB or any interested parties to visit Earth, meet more of our people, and see how we function on our home turf. Maybe we'll all learn something unexpected." Avrax nearly choked on a harmonic resonance. The idea of traveling to Earth, where billions of these paradoxical creatures lived, was equally thrilling and terrifying. Sharim gave him a pointed look, as if to say, "Imagine the data we could gather." But Avrax felt his arms shifting to a deep purple, signifying a mixture of dread and anticipation. The vote passed with an overwhelming majority. For the first time in centuries, the Council added a new classification to the official galactic records. Humans were now designated as paradoxical threat entities, pending ongoing research. The hall erupted in applause, though there was an undercurrent of nervous laughter. Avrax realized that for all the comedic mishaps humans caused, there was genuine respect in the hall for their achievements. Moments later, delegates swarmed around the Terrans, eager to exchange contact information, propose new alliances, or simply ask for a demonstration of the bizarre Disco Light app. Avrax and Sharim retreated to a corner, relieved that the official proceeding had ended without disaster. But they both knew this was only the beginning of a much longer journey. They reconvened back at the TOB's makeshift command center, where a final note from the director awaited them. "Congratulations, Chief Analyst Avrax and Assistant Sharim. Your classification proposal is accepted. Effective immediately, you are assigned to lead the newly established Human Paradox Study Unit. Duration, indefinite." Avrax's arms cycled through colors so rapidly that they looked like a prismatic blur. He sank into a chair, scanning the message with a sense of impending responsibility. Sharim read over his shoulder and let out a low whistle. "Well, on the bright side, we're not losing the budget." Avrax let out a short, wry laugh. "No, we're going to be locked in an endless analysis of humanity. It's like a cosmic puzzle that may never be fully solved." Sharim patted Avrax's crystalline shoulder with a soft tentacle. "At least it won't be boring. And if the human's invitation to Earth is genuine, we'll get more hands-on data than we ever dreamed of." Avrax exhaled a harmonic chord that almost sounded like acceptance. "Yes, I suppose we will." He gazed out the viewport at the swirling orbit of Altaris, the star, and the infinite stretch of cosmic night beyond. For the first time in his career, he felt as though he stood on the precipice of something genuinely new, a challenge to all the bureaucratic order he had dedicated himself to. He felt both fear and a strange sense of wonder. 3 days later, when the summit officially concluded, the humans departed with a flurry of farewells and enthusiastic promises to keep in touch. They left behind a swirl of speculation, alliances in the making, and more than one baffled species trying to figure out how a few simple Terrans had accomplished so much in so little time. Avrax watched them go from the upper deck, arms at a steady shade of introspective purple. Despite all he had witnessed, a part of him still struggled to comprehend how a species with such ordinary physical attributes could be so formidable. Sharim joined him, carrying a new datapad loaded with additional requests. "Several species want to form research packs with us," Sharim said. "They want to pool resources to study humans. Even the Dravik are on board with a joint classification project." Avrax managed a faint chuckle. "The same Dravik who nearly killed a human for eating their sacred food? Or so we thought. Now they want that same human to attend their warrior festivals," Sharim said. The Dravik left a note calling him Battle Brother Terran. Avrax lifted his gaze, letting his mind run free for a moment. "I suppose that sums it up. Humans break all the rules, but somehow it works in their favor. Perhaps that's the hallmark of a truly paradoxical threat. They might unify the galaxy just as easily as they could disrupt it. Sharam's tentacles curled in a gesture of agreement. So what do we do now? We do what the director told us, Avrax replied, feeling his forearms shift to a cautious green. We keep observing, keep documenting. We refine the classification as more data emerges. Maybe we'll travel to Earth. Maybe we'll host Earth delegations here. In any case, we'll be living with this assignment for a long time. Together, they left the vantage point and strolled down the corridor leading to the top shuttle bay. Workers hurried back and forth, loading crates of data crystals, stowing away recording equipment from the summit. In the background, Avrax could hear snippets of conversation in dozens of languages, many of them referencing those humans. He thought of all the new alliances, the new questions, and the new uncertainties that had arisen in just a few days. He thought of how, on paper, humans were never supposed to amount to much in a cosmic sense, too fragile, too disorganized. Yet they had catapulted themselves onto the galactic stage and left an unforgettable impression. They had turned a ceremonial artifact into a functional device, discovered a star map from an ancient civilization, and charmed half a dozen powerful species with nothing more than random humor, a genuine curiosity. As he boarded the shuttle with Sharam, Avrax felt oddly inspired. Maybe the old systems were too rigid. Maybe the galaxy needed a species that operated on whimsy and daring. Yet he had no doubt that classifying them as a threat was warranted, if only because unpredictability could be as dangerous as a fleet of battleships. The shuttle hatch sealed behind them, and they found their seats in the cabin. Sharam quietly reviewed notes on a personal console, while Avrax gazed at the curvature of Altrese through a porthole. In the reflection of the glass, he saw the swirling pastel colors of his own crystalline arms. No one color dominated. That, he supposed, was fitting, because in dealing with humans, there was no single emotional state. You had to be calm, anxious, curious, cautious, and excited all at once. They embodied potential for both creation and destruction in equal measure. The shuttle took off, leaving the summit far below, destined for the GTOB headquarters that orbited Kestra 9. Avrax wondered how many more incidents would arise once the humans fully explored that precursor star map. Possibly, entire new frontiers would open up. Possibly, conflicts would ignite over who got to claim the discoveries. And in the middle of it all would be these strange Terrans, uncertain but determined, forging ahead through instinct and improvisation. Avrax closed his eyes, letting the hum of the engine resonate with his crystal form. For better or worse, the galaxy had just changed. When they arrived at the orbiting bureau station, they were greeted by a swarm of GTOB staff, all eager for updates. Avrax and Sharam struggled to maintain composure as they endured a barrage of questions. Everyone wanted to know, how exactly had the humans activated that artifact? Did it contain records of precursor technology? Could the humans replicate that success on other dormant devices? Avrax tried to give neutral answers. He didn't want to incite a frenzy. The final classification was all he could really offer. We believe they are paradoxical threat entities, he said over and over. No, that's not an insult. Yes, it's new. No, we don't anticipate they'll blow up the station. Probably. Soon, the station quieted to its usual bureaucratic routine, though there was still an undercurrent of excitement. Avrax and Sharam retreated to Avrax's personal alcove, exhausted but determined. They had a million new tasks, forms to fill, new data to log. The GTOB had insisted they remain the leading experts on humanity. They were, after all, the ones who proposed the classification. Sharam's eyes flickered with amusement. Do you think we can handle being the galaxy's top experts on humans? They're so random. Avrax's crystal arms displayed a swirl of white and blue, an expression of resolve. We have to try. The Council is counting on us. And in a strange way, I'm intrigued. I want to understand how an unarmed civilian can also be a deadly predator, in the sense that they can derail entire political structures with a single impulsive act. Sharam gave a fluting chuckle. We might not truly solve that mystery, but we'll have one grand time documenting it. I, for one, won't mind learning more about their comedic infiltration tactics. Outside the alcove window, the starlight bathed the orbiting station in a soft glow. Avrax gazed at the silent cosmos and thought of Earth, that unremarkable star system that had yielded such remarkable beings. He imagined billions of humans, each a microcosm of unpredictable potential, all living on one planet and in colonies across their system, presumably, constantly churning out new ideas and new improvisations. No wonder the entire galaxy was abuzz. The potential ramifications were limitless. He recalled the final words from the human ambassador at the summit. Perhaps we'll meet again in our corner of the galaxy, so you can see how we live. That invitation hung in Avrax's mind like a distant star beckoning. A year ago, he would have dreaded stepping foot on a chaotic world full of illogical bipeds. Now, though, he wasn't so sure. Part of him wanted to go, to see the place that produced these paradoxical creatures firsthand, to walk among them and witness their bizarre customs. He wondered if, perhaps, understanding humans might teach the entire galaxy a new way to innovate, to cooperate, or even to approach ancient artifacts. Those thoughts lingered as Avrax and Sharim began drafting the next iteration of their classification document. It was an ever-evolving file, an ongoing log of anomalies that would shape how the galaxy approached humans. They titled it Paradoxical Threat Entity, Detailed Analysis of Homo sapiens, Terrans, Earth-Dwelling Primates. The introduction read like a cautionary tale, but also an ode to infinite possibility. Though lacking natural armaments, these beings wield creativity as a weapon, transforming vulnerabilities into strengths. Though physically unimposing, they regularly outmaneuver more advanced species by exploiting illusions, humor, or small acts of courage. Their capacity for forging alliances in unexpected ways poses both a boon and a threat to existing political balances. Indeed, they exemplify the only known instance where an unarmed civilian can, under the right circumstances, exhibit the disruptive power of a deadly predator. Sharim typed a concluding line. They're the living embodiment of cosmic chance, rolling dice that the rest of us did not even know existed. Avrax read it and nodded. Perhaps that was the simplest way to put it. Then he leaned back, letting his tired crystals shimmer softly. There was still so much to do. More incidents to record, new requests to handle from species wanting more data. But for now, Avrax felt something akin to pride that they had at least named the phenomenon. With the classification decided and the council support secured, the galaxy would be on notice. Humans, by virtue of their unpredictability and raw adaptability, had joined the ranks of recognized species in a category all their own. The consequences of that recognition would ripple through star systems for generations to come. And in some intangible, perhaps even comical way, Avrax sensed that humans were just getting started. He thought of them stepping aboard ships destined for the precursor coordinates, poking at relics everyone else treated with solemn reverence, giving them playful slaps to see if they powered on. Maybe they would discover unimaginable wonders or usher in a new era of galactic exploration. Or maybe they would stumble their way into catastrophes that tested the rest of the galaxy's patience. Either way, Avrax suspected it would not be dull. Beyond the station's thick observation windows, the star field stretched into infinity. One pinpoint of light among the countless was Earth's sun. Avrax's forearms hovered between a thoughtful violet and a wistful turquoise. In all that vastness, who would have imagined that frail, hairless bipeds could shift the course of interstellar affairs simply by messing around with technology they barely understood? At last, Avrax rose from his seat. Sharim quietly followed, powering down the console. The final line of the day's official note glowed on the screen, a simple statement that signaled the completion of their immediate duty, classification approved. That was it, a brief phrase marking the end of one journey and the beginning of another. Avrax paused in the doorway, glancing back at the now quiet console, the GTOB records flickering behind a security partition. Then he nodded. No matter how bizarre or frustrating the humans' methods were, No matter how many times Avrax had to rewrite a threat assessment to capture their elusive nature, he realized he was looking forward to the challenge. The galaxy had changed, and so had he. Perhaps that, in the end, was the real power of these so-called paradoxical threat entities. They changed everyone they touched, even the galaxy's most stubborn bureaucrats. He left the alcove, Sharim at his side, ready to face whatever new puzzle the humans would present. An invitation loomed on the horizon, to travel to Earth and see for themselves. An entire planet of paradoxes awaited. Avrax's arms settled into a hue reminiscent of dawn, a fresh beginning. He didn't know when or how they would make that trip, but he knew one thing for certain. They would never see the universe quite the same way again.